Hi, welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I am DV LeBron, and today I have a very special guest, Mr. John Wray, who is running for House District 10 of Texas. Mr. Wray, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Stevie. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Just busy days of campaigning, but everything's going really well. Thank
And
you.
it's a very short campaign, so it's all truncated. So I imagine you have been busy. So I do appreciate you coming on. So I wanted to go ahead, as you saw with the census, the population in this area has exploded.
Right.
So I wanted to go ahead and have you kind of, for those who may not know you, can
Sure.
you go ahead and give them an intro where you're from? Just kind of tell them about you.
Absolutely. I grew up in Waxahachie. I really lived my entire life in Waxahachie. I spent the first year of my life actually in Milford. My dad grew up in Milford, and my parents lived with my grandparents for the first year of my life. But after that, I moved to Waxahachie. I went to Waxahachie Public Schools, graduated from Waxahachie High School in 1989. I then went off to Texas A&M University, where I got a Bachelor of Science degree. I then went to the University of Texas Law School in Austin. I worked for a few years in Houston. For the first 6 years of my legal career, I spent in Houston, and fortunately, I was able to escape Houston and move back here to Waxahachie, which I did in 2002. Served on a lot of boards and commissions, tried to be a good community activist and volunteer. Here in Waxahachie, I served 6 years on the Waxahachie City Council, including a 1 year stint as mayor. I was first elected state representative while I was serving as mayor. That was back in 2014. I took office as state rep in January of 2015. Served in that position until January of 2021, just earlier this year. I did in 2016. I actually moved from Waxahachie to Midlothian. So for the last 5 years, I've lived in Midlothian. And my mom and dad are both Ellis County natives, and in fact, my family has lived in Ellis County for about 150 years. So my roots here go way back, but I welcome all of our new neighbors as well.
Well, that definitely is a history. You said 150 years.
That's right. Yeah,
Now that's a
correct.
Texan, right? That's definitely a Texan. So, a lot of things going on in Texas, and now you run for HD10.
Right.
You were previously the representative for this area, so why run again?
Sure. Well, let me give you a little context. So, I announced that I was retiring after the 2019 regular session of the legislature. So, that was actually in July of 2019. So, I know it's hard to remember a time before COVID, but that was actually before COVID. So, one of the big things, obviously, that's changed is COVID, and it's had a lot of impact on Texas, on the world, of course. And there's been a lot of legislative issues presented by COVID that has inspired me to go back and energized me to go back. We've seen this big expansive use of executive power, whether it's at cities or counties or at the state level. The legislature attempted to address that in the regular session here in 2021, but was unable to pass a bill. So I would like to go back and work on that. I thought there was too much executive power and executive authority exercised during the COVID situation. We've seen an explosion in property values in Ellis County because this outer ring they're talking about, people wanted to move out of urban areas and out to the outer ring, which is we were a part of. So we've seen an explosion in our property values, which means we're having more of an explosion in our property taxes. And so I want to work on getting our property taxes under control.
And
There's
we're gonna
been,
I'm
yeah,
sorry, and we're gonna go into those topics definitely. But
right.
I mean, it sounds like you wanted to contribute to your community again.
That's absolutely correct. And just all these things that fell into place with the unexpected and unfortunate passing of Congressman Wright, felt like a good time to continue my work.
What does your experience or your time in there, what do you think it brings to going back there?
Well, one thing that's just super important, which there's no other candidate that can match, is that I have seniority, I have contacts, I know the process, I know the rules of procedure. And that is especially important because the legislature is currently meeting in special sessions We have a special session going on to address election integrity and several other issues. And then we do anticipate a special session in November for redistricting, which is a very, very important topic. I don't need any on the job training. I can show up literally not just on day one, but in hour one, ready to have an impact and make a difference for House District 10.
Now, there's a benefit to having that kind of experience, but do you have the independence going into it to kind of do what's best for the voters of Ellis County, and the rest of your district when you have to?
Absolutely. I told you my history of living here for a long time, and I feel very, very connected to what the citizens around here want. I've always felt very in tune with what the day-to-day Ellis County citizen and House District 10 citizen wants, and I take those values and that perspective to Austin with me.
So let me ask you a fundamental question before we start moving into the topics.
Sure.
Okay, fundamentally, what is the role of state government in the lives of the people of Ellis County?
Well, I think it should be as minimal as possible. I want state government to stay out of your way as minimal as possible and as little as possible. Historically, there's a couple of topics that are sort of the fundamental gambit, if you will, of state government. That is public education. The state government provides a system of public education that's in the state constitution. It's been a part of our constitution since Texas was a republic. In addition to that is transportation. The state is heavily involved in maintaining a public highway system, whether it is the interstates, the U.S. highways, which the state helps to maintain and build, as well as the farm to market roads. And the state also participates in airport infrastructure and other transportation. So public education, transportation, public safety. Of course, the state administers the DPS, the Department of Public Safety. And debatably, now the state does play a role in public health because of programs enacted by the federal government that the federal government tells the state to administer, such as Medicaid.
Okay. Now, so you won't be reimagining the police anytime soon?
No, I'm very supportive of the police and do not support defunding police. We're very dependent upon the police to keep an orderly society and to secure the border. So I'm very supportive of the police.
Okay, so let's go into some of the issues. As you know, recently, the Democrats have fled to DC because of a voter integrity bill that is in Austin right now. They said that it's voter suppression and they are not going to be here to vote for it. And they're not here to vote for every other bill that needs to be voted
Right.
on over this. So they're center line, and the governor has been he's going to continue doing special sessions, and there's been civil arrest warrants.
Mhm.
So I wanted to get your take on that, on the current situation and the current environment, Austin.
Sure. Well, I think that what the Democrats are doing is obviously wrong. They're abandoning their constituents. They're abandoning the state of Texas. They're abandoning their duties. And they're doing so really just to showboat, I think, because the messaging that they're putting out regarding the Republican election integrity bill is just simply false. The bill does not do anything to suppress voters or voter turnout. It makes it easier to vote and harder to cheat. And that's just a part of democracy. And that's something that we can all support and get behind. So if I'm reelected by the voters to go back and do this job, I want to lend my voice, and I'm doing so even as a candidate, lending my voice to change that narrative because the Democrats have created a false narrative. The Republican bill mainly addresses a lot of proactive, progressive things done by the Harris County voter office. To tell your viewers out there, Harris County, as you know, is our most populated county, and 25% of all votes cast in the state of Texas, that's 1 out of 4 votes cast in the state of Texas in a general election, are cast in Harris County. And Harris County did some highly inappropriate things using COVID as an excuse. They had 24-hour voting. They had drive-through voting. They had drive-through ballot box voting. They mailed out mail-in ballot applications to everyone, whether you requested one or not. And this Republican bill simply makes the rules uniform and says, hey, we can't do that anywhere in the state of Texas. We're all going to follow the same rules. We're all going to have early voting at the same time, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty straightforward and very common sense and very, very fair.
I could definitely see that. When it comes to voting, that's one of our very most prized things. I mean, people have died for that right, so it has to be protected.
That's
It
right.
can't be repressive, obviously, but it has to be. There has to be some integrity in it. So
I agree. And folks have to have faith in the result of elections, because if they don't have faith in the result of elections, they don't have faith in our democracy. So it's incumbent upon us to restore that faith.
all right, so let's talk about issue that's coming because of the census and the growth and the changes in population. And you were talking about how Houston area is our biggest voting and stuff. And
Mhm.
so, how does that affect redistricting? What do you bring to the table when it comes to redistricting? What can people expect from you?
Yeah, this is a vitally, vitally important task. So every 10 years, the state legislature is tasked with redrawing the 150 state house districts, the 31 state senate districts, and the U.S. congressional districts. Now, Texas has had over the last 10 years 36 U.S. House of Representative districts. Due to the growth of Texas, we are picking up 2 additional seats. We'll have 38. So the legislature is going to draw all of these districts. The way these districts are drawn is highly impacted by federal law, and there will be a lawsuit. Texas will be sued over its redistricting plan by the Democrats. Um, I have legal training, I have experience in the House. I know anything that I say as a candidate for this office and anything that I say as an office holder can be used as evidence in that sure to happen lawsuit in federal court over the redistricting plan. So I am cognizant of that. I know what to say and what not to say, and more so than that, I have the relationships with the people that are in the House, and that will help draw these districts with me. I know Chairman Todd Hunter, Chairman of the House Redistricting Committee. I know the other members of the Redistricting Committee. I'm familiar with the state. I know the representatives throughout the state who will play a role in this process. So I'm ready to go, and I'm ready to protect the interests of our area. I'd like to see the DFW Metroplex area get one of these additional congressional seats. And, I just bring a level of experience and competency to that process that can't be matched.
Okay, so that definitely is going to influence how your party does as far as redistricting. But how do we what kind of, you were saying that there's some things with the federal government. Obviously, I can't have you line them all out, but what restriction you think would be
Well,
most detrimental?
Federal laws are designed to, prevent in part gerrymandering, although federal law does almost to some degree mandate gerrymandering in certain situations to ensure that certain groups are not suppressed in voting. Uh, so that's where you have to look into this process and to make sure that you protect the interests of the citizens of Texas without doing something that you're certain will be thrown out in federal court. Because under federal law, believe it or not, federal courts then have the ability to draw those lines for you, to do the redistricting for you. And nobody wants that to happen. We don't want a federally appointed judge to redraw our districts.
I think that happened back east somewhere, or
It,
yeah, something like that.
there's
So
also there's a concept called pre-clearance as well. Once you get into pre-clearance, you can't adopt districts without getting it pre-cleared by a federal court. We certainly don't want to be in that situation.
okay, so let's talk about something that affects every single person that's a homeowner,
Sure.
and that's taxes. I mean, taxes are, and I've said it on the show before, they can be quite rough, especially, people on fixed incomes, or, when your mortgage that you sign for is, $900, but with the taxes, you are now up at 1,700 $1,700 a month. You
That's
could
right.
end up losing your house for taxes.
You
That is
can.
not, I mean, you could be on any political side of the aisle, but losing your house for taxes is just not right.
Right.
I
That's
wanted
right.
to go ahead and talk to you about that. What proposals would you bring? What has been your history on taxes, property taxes? What kind of things can the voters of Ellis County expect of you if you are elected?
I would say this is, we have issues that come and go. Certainly, border security, they don't necessarily come and go, but we have issues that are hot at the moment that people talk to me about and they're concerned about. But kind of the one issue that has a lot of staying power and that's always on people's minds is property taxes. And property taxes are way too high. We need a solution. We need to get rid of property taxes. And in the meantime, we need to lower them as much as possible. So let me give you just a little bit of history about what I participated in previously and what I would hope to accomplish in the future. First off, in my 6 years, that was 3 terms. I spent 2 of those terms on the House Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee with authority over tax issues. Back in 2015, during my first session, we did do some property tax reform, which primarily was resulted in the standpoint of increasing your homestead exemption for school property taxes. That did result in lower property taxes for most people, but they really didn't feel much of it, probably because their appraisal increased so quickly that it soaked up the entire amount that they otherwise would have saved through a higher homestead exemption. Back in 2019, my last session, I again served on Ways and Means. We implemented a historic property tax reform at that time. We cut property taxes by $5 billion. We also implemented a number of transparency items in the appraisal process to try to make the appraisal process more taxpayer friendly and more transparent. We put a cap on how much local governments could raise your property taxes, which was 3.5%. Without you having the ability to file a rollback election. There's always been this concept of a rollback election, but it used to be that you had to petition, taxpayers had to petition to have a rollback election if taxes were raised by 8%. We changed that law and said, no, if local government raises taxes by 3.5%, it's an automatic rollback election. So we tried to give taxpayers a lot more control. Let me tell you what I would like to do. I would like to migrate away from the property tax to a sales tax. And I'm not talking about a tax increase. I'm talking about a tax swap, a revenue neutral tax swap, where we get rid of your property tax, either in whole or in part. You pay a county, a city, if you live in the city, and a school district property tax. If we could get rid of at least one portion of that, the city tax, the county tax, preferably the school district tax because it's the biggest, and switch to a sales tax, that would be great. Why is a sales tax better? It's more fair. It's easier to understand. It's more transparent. You see it right there on your bill when you buy a good or a service. You can't avoid it. If you buy a good or a service, you're going to pay that tax. So you can't avoid it by dealing, the way some people avoid their income tax by dealing in cash. And that sales tax is paid by anyone that's buying a good or service in the state of Texas. They don't have to be a Texan. If they're buying a good or a service in the state of Texas, they're paying that sales tax. That goes for people that are in the state of Texas legally and people that are in the state of Texas illegally. Because we know a lot of people that enter the country and the state illegally avoid paying their fair share of tax, but they can't do that if they're paying a sales tax.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's definitely an issue that has to be addressed, and it sounds like you have some history and knowledge on it.
I
I'm
do.
thankful. I'm thankful when somebody's willing to address that because it is something that's definitely affecting everybody. Everybody
Right,
who's a property owner, definitely.
right.
So, um, wanted to go ahead and talk border security because you had
Sure.
mentioned it earlier. Right now we have, I think it was 200 plus thousand apprehensions on the southern border. Now I
Right.
know that immigration is a purview of the federal government. Obviously, there's some issues there. If 250 something thousand people are coming in, but in the laws it does say that we can go concurrent with them. We just can't go above them. What are some of the things that Texas can do in this current crisis to help mitigate? And I mean, we're going to go into COVID later, but COVID's an issue with this too. So I just kind of
Right.
wanted to see what your thoughts were and what are some of the things you would do or propose if you were elected.
Sure, and I had the ability in prior sessions, two of my three prior sessions, I served on the Homeland Security and Public Safety Committee, which addresses this issue in the Texas House. And so I have a lot of experience and a lot of background on it. You're right, it is the purview of the federal government. And according to federal law, you really can't arrest somebody for entering the country illegally. CPB, Customs and Border Patrol, CBP rather, can interdict and apprehend someone and put them in the system, the immigration system, which is that extremely frustrating catch and release system. But what we tried to do, we've tried to be very creative in state law to criminalize as much of the activity that we see occurring on the border as possible, so that Texas law enforcement, whether it's the DPS, whether it's the sheriff's offices in the counties along the border or any other county where this is occurring, or local law enforcement such as the cities, can arrest folks and prosecute them and discourage them from entering the country. Let me give you some examples. We have strengthened the laws on human trafficking in my prior sessions. And I think we should continue to do that. And we should continue to think creatively about that, because you hear about these coyotes, that are transporting people into the United States. And we've tried to criminalize their activity so that they can be, and sometimes they're bringing these poor folks into the nation for inappropriate purposes where they're just victimized. So we have tried to criminalize this human trafficking activity. We've tried to make trespass laws stronger because, as you know, when you cross the river and you enter the United States, you're not just entering a country or a state, you're entering someone's private property, someone's ranch, someone's home. So we've tried to strengthen criminal trespass laws to allow law enforcement to apprehend folks. We've done a number of other things. Back in the 2015 session, we created a border security control center in Hidalgo County, where we tried to coordinate both law enforcement and prosecution efforts for the entire huge stretch of the Texas border. We've tried to be smart about using technology. We spent a lot of money or directed money from the state treasury because our constituents wanted it, taxpayers wanted it, to buy smart technology, cost-effective, fiscally conservative technology, such as these devices called aerostats. It's effectively a blimp that's tethered to the ground that has cameras and motion detectors in it that watches the border. When something's detected, law enforcement can be dispatched to interdict those folks. We hired 250 more DPS troopers to help patrol the border. We've done a host of things, and I want to go back and continue that work and to help build a state wall.
So you would support funding the border wall by Texas?
It's very expensive, and I would want to do it in a fiscally conservative, smart way. Most of the illegal crossing occurs in the Rio Grande Valley. That's 4 counties, starting with Cameron County and moving upriver from there, Hidalgo, I believe Willacy and Starr. Those are the 4 counties that constitute the Rio Grande Valley. I want to concentrate efforts there because that's where most people enter. First off, that's the shortest route. If you look at the map, that's the closest part to Central America, et cetera. But once you get upriver from those 4 counties, the terrain of Texas becomes intimidating. And really the terrain of Mexico itself. A human being cannot carry enough water with them to cross that area on foot without dying. And so, of course, if it's easier for us to see a vehicle that is moving across that area and to interdict that vehicle with law enforcement. People on foot more easily evade law enforcement, but they just cannot carry enough water to cross that area. And I want to point out another spot quickly, DV, where my experience plays a role. But there is a weed that grows wildly along the banks of the Rio Grande River called carrizo cane. We, as a state, have a program to abate carrizo cane. We do that because people entering the country illegally and criminals and outlaws who want to do nefarious things along the border, they hide in the carrizo cane to evade law enforcement. So we spend some money on pesticides, herbicides to try to eradicate that carrizo cane. Sometimes I have seen people in the budget process try to amend the budget to try to take that money away because they think it's wasteful. They don't understand what it means. But I think the voters here in Ellis County want to spend that money because they're concerned about border security, and that's a cost-effective way to help secure the border. And that's one of the ways in which that my experience plays a role. So I know what that program's for.
So I wanted to move on to property rights, because you were talking about putting, this border wall and stuff, and obviously it's going to affect some people and their property.
Right.
There's another thing that could affect people's property, and that's the high-speed train. Um, Texas has been very reluctant, or hasn't wanted to make the high-speed train about government, versus California, where they went all government on it with some contracts, and that we've seen what happened with that. So,
Right.
what are your thoughts on high-speed train and eminent domain, and what are some of the things that you would propose?
Well, I've been very opposed to high-speed rail. I've been a warrior against high-speed rail in my 3 prior sessions, and I want to take up that fight again. I don't think there's been any member of the legislature since 2015 who's filed more bills to try to stop or disrupt the high-speed rail project than me. I want to give you an interesting factoid. If you exclude Harris and Dallas counties where the rail starts and stops, and you take the counties in between, I think there's 8 or 9 off the top of my head. I can't remember which, but despite there being 8 or 9 counties, 50% of the people that live in those 8 or 9 counties live in Ellis. So we have the most people in the most concentrated area impacted by the train. People in Ellis County do not want that train. It does not benefit our county one single bit. It takes away private property. In some instances, it's been in families for hundreds of years or decades, more than 100 years. And I want to continue that fight to prevent that. And I did file a bill in one of the prior sessions to clarify that the high-speed rail project promoters did not have eminent domain authority. That bill did not pass. I didn't get any support on it from my colleagues, but I'll try again. Unfortunately, in the meantime, a court case has made its way to the Texas Supreme Court that has said, well, heck, they do have eminent domain authority. So that makes it even more important for us to continue that fight in the legislature.
Okay. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. COVID has reared its ugly head again. So I want to know, because you were kind of talking about this earlier, mass mandates for vaccination. Places like California have, come out full on, you will get vaccinated, or, it's like a vaccine passport. So I want to know what are your thoughts on that, briefly, and what are some of the things that you would not like to see in happening.
Well, I see certainly mask or vaccine passports to me are an invasion of your personal liberties, your privacy. I think that mask mandates and vaccine mandates are also an invasion of your liberties. I think it's easy. It's easy enough to say that state institutions or government institutions, whether they're local, should not have these mandates or have these requirements. I also think that once you get into private sector, you run into private property rights, which I do value private property rights. And there's an argument there that, if I own a small business and I want to say you can't come into my small business unless you're wearing a mask, then that's my right. But there's also the right of customers to say, well, I'm not going to patronize your small business as long as you're requiring a mask. So, there's a little bit of a debate there. I certainly think that this has become such a hot political issue that I would support and err on the side of saying, hey, we can't have these mask mandates or vaccine mandates, even in private sector situations, certainly for the larger institutions. And to give you an example, uh, so we've seen some large retailers, for example, push back on things like gun rights. You can't carry a gun in Walmart. Well, what happened? Well, people stopped going to Walmart. So then Walmart relents. So there's a difference between big private property owners and smaller private property owners, but I certainly think these big private property owners shouldn't place these mandates, whether it's vaccines or masks. And I certainly don't think that local executive authorities, mayors, county judges, governors should have the authority to shut down businesses or mandate masks. I think that's just un American.
So there you have it. John Ray will not be supporting any kind of mask mandates or COVID vaccine passports.
That's correct.
So, okay, let's go into. I'm going to switch gears again because I want to cover some. I'm trying to cover topics so that people of Ellis County can know where you stand.
Absolutely.
So, let's talk about legalization of marijuana. Other states are doing it. Some of them more effectively than others, more measured than others. It seems to be the trend that the United States is moving to as a whole. So I wanted your opinion on marijuana legalization.
Sure, that's a very fair question. Rapidly evolving topic. A rapidly evolving topic where mores are changing in our community, and not only in this community but across the state. Let me give you a little background on that. I served in 2019. I served on the Public Health Committee of the Texas House. We had and we created a subcommittee on cannabis legalization. And that's kind of the I don't like to be politically correct, but there actually is a pretty decent reason why people refer to it as cannabis in the legalization methodology, because the word marijuana was kind of intentionally designed to conjure up some bad ideas or thoughts. But when it came to cannabis legalization, we heard a tremendous amount of testimony in the Public Health Committee, and it was compelling. I heard from a lot of physicians who talked about all of these cannabinoids that are present in cannabis, and scientists are only really beginning to study them. The two most well known, of course, are THC and CBD, but I think there's over 100 more. And a lot of research is going on in Israel. Israel seems to be leading the charge on discovering what some of these cannabinoids do to your health. And I was persuaded that cannabis should be legalized under certain circumstances, certainly for medical purposes. While I was in the legislature, we did approve CBD products and hemp, industrial hemp derived products such as CBD. We passed the compassionate use program, which initially allowed use of cannabis with up to 0.3 THC content for certain conditions. That CUP, or compassionate use program, has been expanded, I think, every session. Oklahoma has a medical marijuana program. Some of our neighboring states do, and I think we're moving in that direction. And it's a little bit of a libertarian view too, and I know that appeals to folks around here as well.
I mentioned that because, as you know, there's been a great big opiate crisis, and there's a lot of vets too that we went through opiate crisis. It affected us. We went through, the drugs that they gave us for depression and PTSD, and there's been, it's still early in the study phases on the effects of marijuana and PTSD and stuff like that. But anecdotally, a lot of veterans swear by it. Say that it's better than taking the pills.
Well,
So
I agree with you, DV. We heard some compelling testimony in the Public Health Committee from veterans. We heard compelling testimony from moms and dads with severely autistic children. And boy, I mean, some of it really pulled at your heartstrings. And I do think we need to move forward in a science-based way. We need to move forward carefully and incrementally. But I certainly am open to expanding medical use of marijuana in Texas.
okay, there you have it. You have Mr. Wray on the record. He does favor expanding marijuana rights, even if it's for medical. And then, so let's hit another topic. Another topic would be the obviously schools were affected quite heavily, and they were the children have lacked in learning, especially special education children. They have suffered, and now while you're running for state rep, a lot of the state money that could go to schools sometimes is held up. And I was interviewing one of the board members, and she was saying that some of the funds were being held up. And um, what will you do to try to make sure that the state gives more funding for schools, especially special education? What can the people in MISD or WISD, what can the parents expect from you if you're elected and you go to Austin?
Well, I think that this ties back really well to the issue of executive power. This is something that has arisen since I was out of the legislature. But yes, there has been some additional monies that came through from the federal government to help schools. But it's kind of gotten hung up in the Texas bureaucracy, whether it's the TEA or decisions that are going on through the governor's office. And I think this is another area where the legislature needs to take a greater role and to make sure that those funds are equitably dispersed and timely dispersed. So that's a big deal, and I think that ties back to getting that executive power under control that I mentioned earlier.
Rapid question on gun control or any gun control measures. Do you support any of them?
I would never support any type of gun control measure. I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment. I'm a lifetime member of the NRA and the Texas State Rifle Association. I have a federal firearms license, although if you're listening to me out there and think that that's unnecessary because the federal government shouldn't mandate that or regulate that and issue FFLs, I agree, but I have one anyway, just to
Yeah.
make life easier. But let me tell you, along those lines, I did vote back in prior sessions. I voted for the open carry bill, and I voted for the campus carry bill. During the 2017 session, we had a constitutional carry bill that came through the Homeland Security and Public Safety Committee, of which I was a member. It was Representative James White's bill. We voted that bill out of committee. I took a record vote in favor of constitutional carry back in 2017. I believe that was probably the first vote in favor of constitutional carry. There were 5 of us Republicans on that committee that voted for the bill. I think that was the first vote in favor of constitutional carry in 100 years in Texas. Very proud of that.
So the last one I have for you is on criminal justice reform. Often, criminal justice reform is portrayed by only one side of the political aisle. Um, as a Republican, there are ways that Republicans can lead on criminal justice reform that are positive, that
Mhm.
can have very positive effects on society. Because, truth be told, the budget for the state prisons is pretty high, and it's going to keep going, keep going. What are some of the measures that you support, or do you have any kind of ideas on criminal justice reform? What you would like to see?
I do. Again, this is an area where I like to be data driven, data informed. The legislature prior to me being there did reform some of the criminal laws. And back 20 years ago, the legislature was very busy building prisons and trying to lease prison space with some of these private prison providers. The legislature took a data driven and data informed approach and made some changes to sentencing and criminalization of certain minor offenses. And we have not had to build new prisons or create new prison space in quite a while. And I certainly think that's a good idea. And Texas is just as safe. We haven't seen a rise in crime or that type of thing. So I certainly support I'm a fiscal conservative. I want to be a hawk on spending your tax dollars. And that seems like a great place to save some money if we have good data that shows that we can make some changes to either criminalization or punishment criteria and save the state some money, but not impact the state negatively when it comes to public safety.
Okay. Now, I told you it was the last. I apologize, because one of the questions that
That's
are
okay.
near and dear is
Sure.
veterans benefits in the state. Now, Texas is pretty generous in the benefits. what are some things that you'd like to see changed, or maybe you would support? For instance, maybe a tuition waiver at state colleges for disabled vets. Is that something that you could see yourself supporting? What are some of the ideas you have for veterans in Texas? Quickly.
Well, let me tell you, I support veterans, and I think we need to honor their service and to realize their sacrifice. We Throughout my course in the legislature, we have several times waived fees for veterans, or lowered fees for veterans, lowered property taxes for veterans. I want to continue that same line of legislation and honor veterans as much as possible. And along those lines, I would point out that um, I did pass the bill that named the portion of 287 through Midlothian the Chris Kyle Memorial Highway, which I did that in part as part of my commitment to honor veterans.
Well, thank you for that. Chris Kyle is venerated, but he was my brother, definitely.
Absolutely.
So this is the point we're in the show where you talk to the people.
Sure.
You get to tell them why vote for John Ray again, and go ahead and give them your pitch.
Yeah, obviously, I feel that my values reflect your values. I want to go back and work on Republican priority legislation. I think that what impacts or makes sets me apart is my experience. When you're a freshman legislator, not much is expected of you, either by constituents or by your colleagues in the Texas House, and I will not be in that position. I will not be a freshman legislator. If you look at the seniority list of the Texas House, I would be at about number 71, and that's before there'll be some retirements, et cetera, going into the 2023 session. I would step right back into my seniority position. I have relationships with key people to help push legislation forward. I have a track record of achieving results for both locally, passing bills locally, as well as contributing in a meaningful way to statewide legislation. So I can do that. The other thing that takes a while to learn is the bureaucracy. A lot of what the state government or what your state representative does is help you with the state government. So if you're a plumber and you have a problem with your license, you call the state representative and you say, hey, I'm having trouble with TDLR, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. Can you help me? And it takes a while to figure out how to do that. And I know the people to call and the ways to get that done. I want to give you an example of that. It's a simple example, but I had I can give you more than this one, but this is one I like because it made me feel really good. I had an elderly couple that lives here in Ellis County. Their son was incarcerated in the Texas prison, and he was sent to a Texas prison out in El Paso. And his parents were elderly. They couldn't travel. They had health problems. They were kind of in their end stage of life, and this was their only child. And they came to me and they said they can't go visit their son because he's so far away and they can't get to him. Can you help us get him moved to a prison that is closer so that we can see him? And I was able to get that done. And I didn't do it for the guy in prison. I did it for the mom and dad. And I will be able to step right back into that role and do that kind of good work, both in the legislature by taking the right kinds of votes to support a conservative Republican agenda and supporting constituent casework here in Ellis County. So I would respectfully ask for your vote, and I'm happy to visit with anyone out there individually or one-on-one. Just reach out to me, and I want to make sure you know where I stand.
What's the best way to reach out to you, Mr. Ray?
I've got a Facebook page, a fan page. It's John Ray for Texas. You can look there. And I've been readily giving my cell number out. This is a service-oriented job, and I'll give you my cell number. It's 469-337-1441. I haven't heard another candidate give their cell number out, but that's my cell number, 469-337-1441. Reach out to me. I have a servant's heart and approach this as a public servant. So if you have any questions, just reach out to me directly.
Do not call John for pizza. He is not doing pizza delivery, folks. He is trying to run for representative. So thank you so much for coming on the Ellis Talker Show. I appreciate you coming and wanting to talk to the people of Ellis County. I wish you the best in your race. Everybody, I'm going to be having every candidate for HD10 pretty much on here for this week. This is going to be a busy week. I'm going to have interviews pretty much the whole week. So I again, thank you so much for coming, and good luck.
Thank you.